I know that President Darby from the Small Business Association is also here. And of course, JAMPRO, we have the Chairman Milton Samuda and President Edwards. We have several visitors from overseas, including the leaders of our IFI programs here in Jamaica, and of course, members of the government and our NGO community. I'm really grateful to Minister, well, I'm not sure if I'm grateful, but Minister Davis and Minister Guy jointly contrived to have me make a presentation which combines what I was supposed to do in one of the panels with an overview of the infrastructure developments that underpin the logistics environment. And so my presentation this morning focuses on infrastructure, logistics hub, and economic growth. Where are we now? And I will touch on several of the points that have been made so far by the Prime Minister and Minister Hilton. I thought I would, because I've made presentations to many of the organizations already, fashion this presentation to answer a set of questions that are frequently being asked. President Zaka and Mr. Biles have a responsibility for overseeing the Extended Fund Facility program. And somehow the logistic hub gets tied into that. And so one question that gets asked frequently, how does the logistics hub really relate to the economic, how does the IMF get involved in logistics is the question, and we'll try to answer that. What really is this source of advantage that Jamaica has in logistics? How are we currently doing in relationship to that advantage, and what else needs to be done? Probably the most frequently asked question is, what exactly is the logistics hub? Can you explain what is meant by it? What are the key features? Who are responsible? And I think Minister Hilton has already begun that process. The question is asked, what is the government role? And in particular, what is the local private sector role? Several private sector organizations have asked, can you tell us what exactly is expected of the private sector in this process? And what are the educational requirements? How are we going to go about coordinating the government, the private sector, and NGO inputs? And what are the next steps in the process? So let me begin by asking, what is the relationship between the Extended Fund Facility and the Strategic Locational Advantage? The Extended Fund Facility is one of the most important programs that we have undertaken as a nation. And it has some very onerous objectives, the first of which is to sharply contract the fiscal sector and to undertake a structural reform to reestablish debt sustainability. That involves the government operating with a primary surplus of 7.5%, meaning the government will take in more revenues than it will spend by a factor of 7.5% of those revenues. Secondly, we'll reduce the debt to GDP ratio from its unsustainable level of about 135% currently to 95% by 2020. And the objective will be to rebuild the official reserves, and we'll have a nominal exchange rate depreciation, and we'll meet these quantitative targets over the next 16 quarters. That's a contractionary process. It will contract the economy. It will make expenditures by the government will be lower, so the economy will actually shrink by virtue of those activities. And so the counterbalancing measure is to have a set of growth strategies. Those growth strategies, I'd break them up broadly into a couple of components. One is to ensure that the social safety net remains, because we don't want to undermine social cohesion as that process occurs. We want to accelerate the transformation of the physical environment and youth skill development. The medium, small, and enterprises and community-based enterprises have to be enhanced. And we want to leverage some of the locally available skills in IT, animation, sports, and entertainment. We also need to correct the internationally uncompetitive cost factors, the most significant of which are our energy cost, which is out of line with all of the nations that we trade with, and our security costs, which are much higher than those. And we need to meet the structural benchmarks for doing business by tax incentive reforms and our taxation policy. And then most of all, you hear within that context that one of the big areas of potential growth while the economy is contracting is this logistics. And Jamaica ought to take advantage of its strategic location, which the minister mentioned already, to become integrated into the global supply chain. So then the next question is, what exactly do we mean by Jamaica's locational advantage? This is a map of the globe that shows the major trade lanes. As the minister said, the major manufacturing entity and the largest ports in the world are now located in Asia, because that's where all the goods are manufactured. They are then shipped to the major consuming locations in Europe, North America, and the rest of the world. To get from Asia, from China, to the eastern seaboard of the United States, one of the most popular ways is through the Panama Canal. So the boats come across the Pacific Ocean through the Panama Canal, and then they drop the cargo off at that location and go back to pick up an additional cargo. And at those locations, they are then shipped into the eastern seaboard. Jamaica, as the minister has pointed out, is located just off the Panama Canal. It's ideally located to be the kind of point where you do transshipment operations, dropping the cargo. Smaller boats will take it into the north, some into North America, some into South America. I'm going to make a case that we have to look at logistics quite broadly, and so I include cruise shipping in this process, the movement of people throughout the region. And Jamaica, again, sits ideally in the major cruise shipping lanes. Here I show two of the routes through the Western Caribbean. One starting in Fort Lauderdale, going to Key West, Grand Cayman, then goes to Ocho Rios and back. The other one from Port Carnival to Cozumel to Grand Cayman, Falmouth, and back. You will note that Jamaica is about midway between these two loops. And later on I'll explain why that is important. But I simply point out that Jamaica's cruise shipping visitors have been increasing, albeit not as fast as the cruise shipping visitors from the other dots you see on this map, largely because of harassment, the perception of harassment. And I'll speak a little bit more to that in a moment. So given this ideal location, are we competitive? Well, this map produced by Mona Geoinformatics, those red dots show all the other ports in the hemisphere. And the size of the dot tells you how big the port is. And you will note that there are a number of dots which are as large or larger than Jamaica's. And so I'm underlining this point that while we have a good location, we are proceeding in a context of competitive economic development. Every single country on that map where a dot is located has as its objective to expand its logistic operations and transshipment operations. So there's nothing peculiar about Jamaica. We have a better location than some. But if their cost environment is more effective than ours, we are going to lose market share to those. And in fact, some of them are moving to attract Jamaica's market share. We also need to look at developments in the global maritime sector, and I will be very brief with this, but I simply want to say that since 2009, 2009, the growth in international cargo traffic volumes has actually slowed substantially since the economic shocks. They have slowed and they have not grown as quickly coming out of this. Secondly, technology continues unabated. So today, the marine vessels are becoming larger and larger. 10 years ago, a vessel of 12,000 TEU was considered, or a vessel that could carry 12,000 containers was considered large. Today, the largest vessels carry upward of 18,000 TEUs. They are larger. On that map, you see what you can't see so well, so I'll leave it. And the other thing that is happening is that you're having dramatic industrial consolidation. The largest players are getting much larger in the industry. Smaller players are getting smaller. Many of them are in economic distress at this moment. So we seem to be having consolidation in industry. And I point out that the cruise shipping industry is also growing slowly. The minister pointed out to the importance of Panama Canal upgrade. I think the Prime Minister also spoke to this. What is the Panama Canal? The ships that come from Asia have to come through to get to the East Coast. The Panama Canal is a little isthmus of land, a little hump in the sea. And you have to get the boat over this hump. And so how do you get the boat over that hump? Well, you put it on effectively an escalator, something that looks a lot like what you have in an airport when you're traveling through. You put it onto one blade, and then you fill that blade, with water, and the boat, of course, rises up. You open the gate, and it slides through. You close the gate behind it and fill it up again, and fill it up with water, and that's how the boat is moved up to the plateau. It sails across, and you repeat the same thing on the downside. That's what the Panama Canal is. And what the Panama Canal has decided that they're going to increase the size of this escalator, or locks as they call them, to now allow for ships up to 13,000 TEUs, or containers, to be transported across. And that has very significant implications, because now bigger boats can come from China through the canal into the Caribbean region and onto transshipment of the East Coast. It's going to create a one-time major movement among container shipping lines as they decide where to stop when they're coming with these large ships. And it's a critical time for Jamaica's container facilities. It provides an opportunity for us to drive volumes for our container terminal, but competition is going to be fierce. So the key observations are that Jamaica does have a location advantage, but the environment is dynamic and constantly changing. The expansion in Panama Canal creates some opportunities for Jamaica, but it is going to take place within a context of competitive development. So where are we now in Jamaica's maritime sector? There are a number of strengths that we have. The geographic location, the container port, Minister spoke to those. We have one of the largest transshipment ports. It's a popular cruise shipping destination. We have good institutions, and institutions matter. We have the Caribbean Maritime Institute, which is the only IMO-certified organization of its type in our region. We have good educational institutions, some existing logistics services, and over 5,000 persons employed in the sector. But there are a number of weaknesses. The weaknesses include the ones that are well rehearsed to everybody in this room. We have a bureaucratic system in which it takes too long to get things done. We operate in a high crime jurisdiction, which means that security costs are high for every business operator in the room. There's perceived corruption, and our container terminal is largely dependent on a very limited number of lines. And there are the threats, including the development of the other ports in the region, and of course, natural hazards. So what is it that we have to do in our maritime sector? We have four things that we refer to as the short-term imperatives. One is to ensure that the port and harbor can accommodate the larger ships that will come in, which means that we have to deepen the channel or the access way for the ships to come into our Kingston Harbor. Two, we need to ensure that the port operates at the highest possible international standards, and that means we ought to attract an international port operator, or global terminal operator, as they're referred to. We need to address, thirdly, the effectiveness, the perception of ineffectiveness and bureaucracy by implementing the port community system as a single window for the sector. And fourthly, we need to expand the port and attract new players to the sector. And I'll discuss very briefly each of these. This is a map of an aerial view of the Kingston Harbor, which is well known. We have a bigger version of it on the back here. We see the Norman Manley Airport, and we see Port Royal. The ships that come along come past Norman Manley towards the bottom of the screen, around Port Royal, make a lazy S, and end up in the Kingston Container Terminal. The channel that we speak of is the portion between Port Royal and the terminal, which needs to be deepened if the big ships are to be able to come through that area. Here's another map of it. You see the blue area, which indicates the areas that would have to be, we'd have to remove some of the material there to allow these big ships to be able to sail through into the harbor. And the Port Authority contemplates doing this in 2 phases. One is to optimize the existing design limits of the berths that are there now by taking it down to a draft of 14.2, and then at a later date extending it to 15.5. Why do it in 2 phases? Well, if you did it to 15.5 now, it may be slightly cheaper, but you'd be building a facility. It's like building a building, a skyscraper, if you were to go in the opposite direction, of which you'd only be using half of it for the next 5 years. Well, somebody's going to have to pay for the capital for the unused component sections of it. And so it may be better to do it in 2 phases. We, however, have done all the engineering work which would allow for it to be done in either 1 or 2 phases. The timing of this is going to be dependent on the next item which I will discuss, which is the Kingston Container Terminal privatization. We refer to it as privatization, but what we're really doing is entering into a concession arrangement with a global terminal operator to operate the port. Everything above the surface, all the equipment, everything would be theirs. They would operate it for 30 years. Where are we today in that process? The RFP has been issued to 3 pre-qualified bidders. I've put their names there simply because they're already in the press and everybody knows who they are, and they are important global terminal operators: Singapore Port Authority, Dubai Port World, and CMA CGM in a partnership with a number of other entities, including China Merchant Marine. We expect the process, as the Prime Minister has said, to be completed well within 2014. So this is pressing ahead, and the timing of the dredging is going to be related to the negotiations to determine whether any of these players prefer to do it themselves. The third is implementing the port community system, which is a mechanism that will have all of the entities within the maritime sector able to communicate with each other, including customs, the port authority, the terminal operators, the agents, and of course the brokers and their customers. Currently, we know that it takes a very long time to process the paperwork when anybody is importing or even exporting goods from the country. The World Bank says it takes about 14 days. Our competitors take about 2 days or less to have their goods imported into the country. One of the major issues relates to how we manage information and paper. And this system is designed to have all of the players being able to access the information that they need in an electronic form. You enter the data once, it's used by everybody, and you get a greater level of efficiency. Cabinet has received and approved the transaction structure. 2 consortia have been pre-qualified, BVAC of the Netherlands and SOGE of France, and SGS from Switzerland, Crimson Logic from Singapore, and Savvy from the United States comprise those 2. The consortia are currently preparing responses to the RFP, and we expect this process to have been completed by the middle of 2014. Thereafter, the companies will go about implementing the system on a phased basis over 2 years. The fourth is to attract new investors. And here, the Minister and the Prime Minister spoke about the discussions which have occurred in the media. A lot of it has centered on the logistic park in the Portland Bight area. In this instance, the government has already announced that Czech, a major, in fact, Czech is the largest dredging company in the world and one of the largest infrastructure developers, has indicated an interest in developing a logistic center, a logistic zone in the Portland Bight with an investment of 1.5 billion, with potentially creating thousands of jobs, and would be a boon to real estate. And the reason that they have identified Jamaica as an English-speaking country, our substantial labor force, certainly compared to the others around us, the stability of our political and social infrastructure, and the fact that we have an efficient and orderly method, a fair system of granting visas. I think you have seen these maps. That's where in the Portland Bight, where the facility is to be located, and the areas of land that are currently under negotiation. These discussions, the minister has already pointed out, are continuing, and he expects to speak to those in due course. That is Minister Davis. So those are the 4 immediate projects. The next phase involves, I wanted to point out that the cruise shipping sector is growing substantially, and we need to take care of that. We need to broaden the base of cruise ship lines operating in Jamaica and to get some of them to develop as home ports. Because of the conditions that I described at the outset, it's not going to be possible for the government of Jamaica to invest in these new ports. And so we're going to have to engage with the private sector in PPPs or otherwise have them build it as a build, own, and transfer model. And I've highlighted that we need to ensure that the towns are integrated into these activities, because I pointed out to you that the major challenge that we face is harassment of our visitors. And so at the bottom diagram shows work which has already begun on Ocho Rios. We are doing a substantial upgrade of the Ocho Rios facility. The Port Authority is undertaking that in association with UDC, which will build a proper trail. And while we are dealing with the infrastructure, we're also dealing with the softer side, trying to work with the persons in the transportation sector and others to ensure that they understand that they are competing with the taxi drivers in Cayman Islands and in Cozumel and these other places, because they would like to keep the cruise ship visitors there, and we need to get them here. We're doing the same thing in Falmouth. This next phase also involves developing dry docking, bunkering, and the crewing sectors, which have good market opportunity and good employment opportunities. So I've described what is happening in the maritime sector. The question is, well, how does this relate to the idea of a logistics hub? Sounds like I've been talking about maritime hubs. So what are the key features of logistic hubs? Well, it may be useful for us to move from where we were to port-centric logistics, which is that when the goods come in to the Kingston Container Terminal, we take them off and they sit in a box. They sit in the container there for a few days. Then they're put onto another ship and go to North America or to South America. Well, suppose when those boxes are sitting there, we actually were to add some value to the goods which are in the box. It would create jobs in Jamaica. It would add value. We'd be able to benefit from that, both with employment generation and potentially even some taxes. And we could become more integrated into the global trading system. And so this is the idea of port-centric logistic centers, where at the point where you have the containers stored, you actually add value to the goods that are in there. And this allows us to, the goal there is to maximize the efficiency of the supply chain and to minimize logistics costs between the origin and destination. What are some of the common ways in which you would add value? Well, one is that they can become the hub for a distribution network. So entities that operate heavy-duty equipment, for example, can either keep all of their spare parts in Costa Rica, in Guatemala, Honduras, and so on. Or alternatively, you could have a centralized location where all the spare parts are maintained and where they are shipped directly to those on an as-needed basis in a very short time frame. This is referred to as consolidating the cargo in regional distribution centers. Another way of doing it is postponing of the final assembly until the very last moment. And I'll give you an example or two of that. So in this process by which you take the goods out of the boxes and add some value, you can think of it as adding value at a very low level all the way up to high value added activities. At the lowest level, you are simply taking goods that have been standardized goods and packaging them for specific distributors. So you may note, many of you shop in the United States when you get a chance, that Walmart and Kmart and all of these marts indicate that they have a process by which if you find anybody else with the same product at a lower cost, they will match it. The problem is if you go into those competing companies, you're not going to find the same product because it's going to have a different code. There are going to be some features of it that are slightly different. How does that get done in an efficient way? And because you don't know what the volume requirements are going to be. Well, if you have all of those, it's effectively as an almost finished good. And at the very last moment, you do the customization. You add the barcodes, you add the special additional add-on materials that are in the box and so on. And then you ship it off to the distributor. That is a way of delaying the final customization to the very last moment. And that's usually done at one of the hubs, one of the nodes in the distribution network. And that represents one opportunity. An entity like Canon, for example, finds it more attractive to ship all of their cameras, not in the cartons that you normally get them in. They ship them as a consolidated bulk. And then when at the final destination, at a location like Jamaica, they'll be put into boxes. The packaging adds space. You add all the necessary materials. You add it in Spanish if it is going to a Spanish country, or in French if it's going to a French-speaking country. And it's better to do that at the location like a hub like Jamaica rather than doing it at the manufacturing center. Going a little bit further up, we have warehousing or a distribution center for automobiles. In Rotterdam, for example, is one of the largest warehouses for automobiles of all types. Of sorts, some of that is happening in Jamaica. Our friends at Kingston Wharves will tell us that today they are the used vehicle hub of sorts for the region. We are purchasing across the region. Given our low socioeconomic development across the region, a lot of used vehicles come in and are used throughout the region. Many of them come to Jamaica and are staged here until they are needed in various other destinations. There's an opportunity to do a lot of value-added activities such that it's maybe cheaper to do the maintenance and repairs of those vehicles in a location like Jamaica, where the labor costs are much lower than in Europe or in Japan or Korea. We have the opportunity for doing similar things for heavy-duty equipment. Panama has become the hub for Caterpillar for the repair of their heavy-duty equipment. A lot of heavy-duty equipment is unsold into the second-hand market. Before you sell it, you have to maintain it. In the past, it used to have to go to Miami for repairs. Today, Panama not only stores the heavy-duty vehicles, it does the repairs there. Here in Jamaica, I see Mr. Gibson up in the ceiling there. Mr. Gibson and his team know that they too have gotten into this in association with the Port Authority. They have brought in some of the straddle carriers and stored them here and are repairing them for our use. But it's a short hop from doing that for other countries in the region. And finally, in terms of the conveyance system, the ships that come here, the ships that take the transshipment cargo onto other destinations, many of them, when they come, they need to have repairs. There are ships that come, and while they are in dock for the day or so that they are here while containers are being unloaded and offloaded, the engines are taken out and a replacement engine put in so that they can get on moving with their journey. That engine will then be repaired so that when the next boat comes along, they will repeat the same thing. There are many other such instances of operations that can take place. All of these are adding value at the location instead of just the transshipment port being a storehouse for boxes. Where are some of the locations that are doing this? Here's the port of Tanjung in Malaysia. You see the port right behind it, and you see immediately behind the port, you have the logistic hub where a number of these activities are taking place. Here's one that has been implemented by one of the bidders for the Kingston Container Terminal, Dubai Port World, in the UK. This is the London Gateway, which is a huge operation, which a modern port, fully automated, which is taking goods which are coming into the UK and to Europe, partially finished. All the activities that we just described would take place in this in a highly automated way, and then it would be distributed to London and to UK and to Europe. Here is the MIT Logistic Park in Panama, and we have a Panamanian speaker who I'm sure will speak to this and the other logistic hubs that are there. But again, the image will show you that immediately behind the port operations are these logistic hubs where these value-added activities take place. Here's one in Hong Kong, and as you know, the real estate in Hong Kong is extremely expensive. So what does Hong Kong do? They shrink the size of the port by using highly automated systems there, and then build their logistics center 7 or 8 stories in the air immediately behind it. They are doing exactly the same things that we have described earlier. So the next question is, can the existing assets be leveraged to create a logistics hub? I've already spoken about the Portland Bight project, which would be a huge greenfield activity. But we also have the area of the Kingston Container Terminal. And in the diagram to the right, you will see the white areas that show the area that is actually available for those kinds of value-added activities that immediately surround the Kingston Container Terminal. There are about 80 hectares of land that immediately surround it. And of course, if you have efficient transportation systems, those value-added activities could take place a little bit further away from the port if they can be transported efficiently. What is unique about the Jamaican situation, actually, is that we are linked. If you look at there are very few locations where you can find a world-class harbor. And right beside it, where you can look over and see it, is an airport of the size of Norman Manley. And it is connected by a reasonably good highway. So there is an infrastructure that already is in place. And the question is, how would we leverage it? And so to move from a maritime hub to a logistic hub, we really are talking about expanding the mode of transportation from just maritime to include aviation and land, to develop the range of IT services, to attract new suppliers, logistic suppliers, freight forwarders, consolidators, warehouse distributors, and what are known now as third and fourth party logistic providers, and to develop a range of support services in legal, finance, insurance, education, repair, and supply. So the next question is, what is the government's role in this? If we say that the government is not going to be able to borrow to invest, what role will the government have? And they have a role in infrastructure development, in attracting investors, and in creating the enabling environment. The Prime Minister spoke to this. What Jamaica has embarked on is a process of linking all the major population centers and business centers by an efficient highway system. We're talking about Montego Bay, Ocho Rios, Mandeville and Maypen, Bogwalk, Linstead, Yuaton, Kingston and Spanish Town. And this is the South Coast Highway, which is about half complete, which will take you from Kingston to Maypen, through to Mandeville, and up into Montego Bay. And then there's the North Coast, North-South Highway, which will take you from Spanish Town to Ocho Rios. Let me focus on the North-South Highway because the Prime Minister spoke to it. This road will take you from Spanish Town to Linstead in phase 1. That segment started in September 2013 and is expected to be completed by the end of January 2016. The section that is controversial, the section between Linstead and Moneague, which is phase 2. As you know, that was almost completed, but there's a section of the highway that had some slippage, and Czech has now taken that over and solved that problem. It is expected to be completed by July 2014, and you'll now, instead of turning left when you get down there close to Yuatan, you'll be able to take the highway through. And then from Monique to Ocho Rios is the final segment, which is already started and is expected to be completed at the end of January 2016. So by January 2016, you'll be able to go from Kingston to Ocho Rios in about 50 minutes on this highway. What is significant about that is that you are able then to bring not only large population groups into a reasonably short period of getting to these locations, but this highway will actually be going through greenfield territory. There are great opportunities for the development of facilities because it is not encumbered by large constructions already in place. The Norman Manley International Airport is also in play. There's a capital development program which was started in 2014, and the subsequent phases are now, phase 2 and phase 3 have now been started. They are undergoing the concession arrangements similar to the port or to Sangsters International. They have secured their objective is to secure a global investment partner through a long-term concession arrangement. And they are implementing an extension of the runway to allow for larger aircraft to be able to both enter and leave the country. They have completed the financial modeling. The transaction structure is under review, and this is being overseen by the IFC. In terms of attracting new investors, I've just put a list up there of the names of the firms that have been mentioned in my presentation. If Minister Hilton were to put a list, there'd be a number of other international players that are already engaged. All of these, however, are not just expressions of interest. They are actually either in the bidding process or in the implementation process of projects. Finally then, special economic zones. Minister spoke to that. How do you move from a port to these port-centric logistic hubs into economic zones? Well, if you have the highway network, it could also be linked by a rail network. You have an airport or 2 airports, you have ports. The question is, where does all of the activities have to take place immediately adjacent to these ports? And the answer would be, if you have an efficient infrastructure for transportation, then you can actually put the factories or these facilities closer to the locations, where people are located. So instead of moving thousands of people to work, well, maybe you can put the facilities closer to where they are located. It means that you need special zoning regulations, special incentives to attract firms into these sectors. You need to revise the regulations that govern how we function to deal with these entities that would be largely import and export oriented. You need revised immigration practices and local labor reforms. I simply point out that the special economic zones, you ought not to be confused, because people often ask, what's the difference between a special economic zone and an export processing zone or a commercial free zone or a free... They're all basically the same thing. There are areas designated in the country with special economic regulations conducive to foreign direct investment. The goal is to generate sustainable economic activity by promoting exports of goods and services and by creating employment opportunities and technology skills transfer. The key features that investors look for in special economic zones are the strategic location relative to the trade lanes, the logistic and transport systems with good connections to international markets, adequate facilities in close proximity to the ports, and everywhere in Jamaica is close to a port, where the goods can be stored and transformed for re-export without customs duties or excise being charged, well-developed ICT infrastructure, and highly skilled and productive workforce, where multilingual capabilities or abilities are attractive. What are the roles for the local private sector? Let me point out that there are a number of private sector firms that are already involved in in the maritime sector and are doing well and are expanding. But there will be additional opportunities in logistics for warehousing, stevedoring, trucking. There'll be a need to supply to the logistic firms. Earlier I spoke about packaging. The logistic centers use huge amounts of packaging. So all the packaging companies, there'll be investors who would follow logistic firms to put up packaging operations. And there'll be opportunities for us to participate in that. There'll be printing requirements. There'll be support for the shipping lines. Bunkering, which is since all the ships, cruise ships and container ships are coming here, and since fuel is very expensive and since fuel efficiency is important, a good thing to do is instead of filling up the ship, leaving China to go to Rotterdam with fuel, for example, to go the entire way, fill it up with enough to get you to Jamaica, and then fill up in Jamaica to go the rest of your journey. That's what bunkering really is all about. It means that the cruise ships that are coming around on that loop, instead of filling up from Miami with enough to make that entire loop, they sail with half the fuel, which is very heavy and hugely expensive to carry. So that's bunkering. The ship repairs and maintenance we spoke about already. I have the minister use the elegant word, chandlering, which is to bring items of food and water and so on to the ships when they are in port and take their slop and other kinds of things and process it. Lest you think that's a small business. In Singapore, it is a very big business. And not only is it taking it from them, it is how you process it to create additional value in the process. And of course, because the financial community in Jamaica is so large, the trading of goods or the adding of value of goods at a location such as we have spoken about, every one of those activities involves a huge number of financial transactions, all of which have to be managed by financial firms. We need to ensure that all the parties involved are compensated as quickly as possible and safely. There are huge hedging opportunities for currency fluctuations. You need to protect against default risks. There are tax accounting and payments. There are custom payments and insurance. So there are the financial sector, the firms that will be coming to establish this, in all likelihood are going to want to have their financial firms come along with them. There are opportunities for the local financial sector to impose themselves in that environment, but you're going to have to be competing on an international basis for the activities of that nature. What are the educational requirements and how are they to be provided? There are a whole list of vocational educational requirements. In logistics, there are going to be logistic associates, which are handling in the warehouse, logistic technicians, which will do repair activities on the goods that are under warranty and so on. There will be broader supply chain educational needs, driver education, repair technicians, and of course, IT skills. There will be need for undergraduate students in logistics and supply chain, operations, research, and IT and logistics. There will be specialized degrees in maritime law and logistic chain management and information and technology combined with logistics. And of course, there will be opportunities for research in logistics. Embedded within the companies in the logistic operation, in-house in those operations, as well as more general research. Finally, how do we coordinate the inputs of the multiple actors? The minister spoke about the National Logistics Initiative Council, which is really to coordinate the efforts of the various ministries and agencies of the government, the non-governmental actors, and the private sector. This requires a huge activity of coordinating the various ministries. Almost all the ministries are engaged in this. The Ministry of Transport and Works, you see listed there are a number of entities. The Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of National Security, the Ministry of Investment and Commerce with JAMPRO and the Free Zone Council, Ministry of Water, Land and Environment, Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Tourism, Local Government, Labor. Then we have the private sector organization. Large number of all the private sector organizations need to be coordinated in this process. The NGOs, the environmentalists, everybody has to be organized in this. The diaspora wants to be a part of it. The National Logistic Initiative Council is designed to do that, to create sets of discussion groups and information networks that will allow the information to go in an efficient way to all of these entities, and that issues are raised to a level where they can be solved in an efficient time frame. I close with this slide. Well, I have this slide and then one more to do. I simply wanted to point out, a lot of people are talking about the next study and the next study. Well, if you look in Jamaica, we have paid for a huge number of studies. We have studies on the bunkering industry, the shipping hub, environmental reports. We have the Caymanas economic zones. There are a whole bunch of papers on that. We have JAMPRO has a library of papers on this. You have the Vernon Field papers, you have the Tinson-Penn papers, you have the KCT privatization papers, the Port Community System papers. You have a whole bunch of papers on clustering and economic competition. You have papers on competition that don't deal with clustering. You have submissions to the cabinet, some of which are now available. Statements in Parliament. We have the GIS information. We're not lacking actually in information. The issue is how we manage all of that information in an effective way. And that's one of the things we have to do. Stop recreating the wheel, and simply because the study wasn't done when we were around, we need to use that information in a more effective way. If you permit me, I just want to put one thing into perspective. The minister spoke of the relationship between ourselves and the other major hubs. This is a map of Jamaica. You don't see it very well, but you can see where Kingston is, right? And you see the little red dots and the green dots, which are the bulk vessels and the cargo vessels that are coming into the Kingston port. A very busy port. This is taking at half an hour interval. So every move on there is the ship moving within a half an hour zone. That is Kingston. Let me show you what Dubai looks like. Slightly more dots, a few more. What about Rotterdam? Rotterdam is actually on a river from the sea going all the way down to Germany. And you'll notice all along the river are thousands of boats which are moving up and down. You have to have police boats to stop and pass and signal and all of those things. I'm just kidding, but it gives you that sense, right? And then the island nation of Singapore. This is what Singapore looks like. At any time in Singapore, there are over 1,000 vessels that are moving around. So we're talking about an order of magnitude difference, or maybe a couple of orders, maybe 3 or 4 orders of magnitude difference between Jamaica, between Kingston and some of these ports. As I said to the minister on various occasions, it's a good thing to create ambition in people by shooting at these locations. But there's a long way between where we are and where they are. What we have to do is simply get on with the work, start moving. Not seizing the opportunity that is there, not worrying about how far ahead they are. Eventually, we'll catch up one day. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.